Week 3 gave us some crazy games, and the college football rankings nearly got shaken up like crazy. There were a lot of close finishes and some near upsets. After the third week of the college football season, here is how my top 25 ballot would look. Before we get to today's video, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications if you're new to the channel. If you love college football content, then this is definitely the place for you. Also, drop a comment down below and let me know your thoughts on the rankings. It helps the algorithm of the video and helps share it with more college football fans. Plus, I'd love to see which rankings you guys agree or disagree with. If there are any other college football videos you'd like to see in the future, comment down below and that very well could turn into my next video. Alright, so here's how my top 25 would look. Staying at number 1 is Alabama, but they had themselves quite the scare on the road. I'm going to give major props to the Florida Gators. After they fell behind 21-3 in the first quarter, I thought this game was going to be a blowout. But they fought and got back into the game and nearly won. The Tide only scored 10 points over the final 3 quarters, but they did enough to win the game. Bryce Young threw for 250 yards and 3 passing touchdowns and looked pretty good as he's now beaten 2 top 15 teams away from home to begin his 2021 season. Florida was having their way with Alabama's defense after the first quarter. For the game, the Gators had 7 more first downs than the Tide and had over 100 more yards. Alabama is still the best team in the country, but yesterday showed that they are in fact beatable. All I have to say is just give us Alabama versus Georgia already. Speaking of Georgia, they dominated yet again. They defeated South Carolina by 27 points. JT Daniels returned after missing last week and didn't miss a beat. He threw for over 300 yards and had 3 passing touchdowns. The Bulldogs do have a tough schedule coming up, as 3 of their next 5 opponents are all ranked. I think Alabama and Georgia are in a tier all by themselves, but it's going to be interesting to see how Georgia performs in the coming weeks against these ranked teams. A week after taking down Ohio State on the road, the Oregon Ducks had a nice easy matchup against Stony Brook. Now, this was a tale of 2 halves though. At the end of the first, Oregon was only up 17-7, but they responded nicely in the second half as they outscored Stony Brook 31-0, winning by 41 points. I really wanted to put the Ducks at number 3 last week over Oklahoma, but I was hesitant. That's not the case this week, as I got Oregon at number 3. Making the jump to number 4 is Penn State. They picked up another impressive win over a ranked team, this one being at home against number 23 Auburn. They trailed early in the game, but they controlled majority of the game to close it out. Sean Clifford played arguably one of the best games of his career as he completed 28 of 32 passes for just under 300 yards with 2 passing touchdowns. Penn State's defense yet again was able to hold their opponent in check. Granted, this was Bo Nix they were facing, but the defense stepped up yet again and made big-time plays when they needed to. At this point, I think it's safe to say that Penn State looks like a legitimate playoff contender. The Hawkeyes come in at number 5, and they are also in the playoff discussion. They took care of business against Kent State, beating them 30-7. Iowa continues to show that they're one of the best defenses in all of college football, as this was a Kent State team who had one of the best offenses in 2020. The Hawkeyes held the Golden Flashes to only 250 yards and only 79 yards on the ground. They held Kent State to 1.9 yards a carry. The offense overall had one of their best games of the season, as Spencer Petras threw for 200 yards and a touchdown, while Tyler Goodson rushed for 150 yards with 3 touchdowns. In my opinion, this is the best defense in all of college football. I've said this every week so far, but if they can get consistency from their offense every week, this will 100% be a playoff team. Coming in at number 6 is Cincinnati, who pulled away at the end and dominated Indiana to close the game, winning by 14. Through the first half, it was a bit of a struggle for the Bearcats as their offense couldn't get into any rhythm. Over the final 3 quarters though, they figured it out as they scored 38 points, including 28 points in the second half. Desmond Ridder was just okay, as he threw for over 200 yards with a touchdown through the air. Although Indiana wasn't ranked, this was still a very impressive win for the Bearcats. Going on the road to a Big Ten team that's going to be competing for a spot in the Big Ten title this year and getting the convincing victory is a much needed resume booster for the Bearcats. Up next at number 7 is Texas A&M, who bounced back after a very close win last week at Colorado. They defeated New Mexico by 34 points, and yet again, this defense looked amazing. They held the Lobos to only 120 yards of total offense, including only 33 passing yards. I talked about Iowa being probably the best defense in the country, but if that's the case, Texas A&M is a very close second. Zach Calzada, who will be the Aggies quarterback for the next month, made his first start of the season. He looked good as he threw for just under 300 yards with 3 touchdowns. Isaiah Spiller had a great game as well, as he rushed for over 100 yards and added 8 yards a carry. This defense is good enough to keep them in the playoff hunt all year. It's just a question as to whether or not their offense will be good enough as well. This may be a hot take, but at number 8, I actually have the Florida Gators. I get that they lost to Alabama, but Florida had a legitimate shot of winning this game at the very end, and they almost did. If they get the 2-point conversion, who knows what ends up happening. I get that it's weird to move a team up after they lost, but this is why I did it. I looked at what Oklahoma, Clemson, and Ohio State have done this season. And frankly, I think the Gators have been the better team compared to those other guys. Not to mention, 2 of those teams also have a loss. So having the Gators move up actually isn't all that crazy. Aside from Georgia at the end of October, the Gators have a pretty winnable schedule the rest of 2021. If they're able to somehow beat the Bulldogs, I think the Florida Gators low-key can make a quiet playoff push. Number 9 is where I have Oklahoma, who had yet another close win. This one being over Nebraska, who was a 24-point underdog. The Sooners won by 7, but the Cornhuskers had their chances to win this game late in the second half. Oklahoma's offense just couldn't get anything going against this Nebraska defense. Spencer Rattler threw for only 200 yards with a touchdown. Eric Gray and Kennedy Brooks both had decent games on the ground, but neither player rushed for more than 85 yards. I thought Adrian Martinez in Nebraska looked really good, and definitely were better than I expected. Still, this makes 2 times already this season in which we've seen Oklahoma struggle to put away a team they're supposed to beat with ease. The only reason they didn't last week was because they played at community college. 3 weeks in, and I'm very concerned about this Oklahoma team. Coming in at number 10 is Ohio State, who struggled to put away Tulsa until the final few minutes. With only 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter, the Buckeyes were only up by 7 points. But 2 touchdowns in the final 3 minutes completely flipped the box score as they ended up winning by 21 points. But it wasn't that lopsided of a game at all. Tulsa came ready to play, as they finished with over 500 yards of total offense and only 7 fewer yards than the Buckeyes. Davis Brim threw for 430 yards with 2 touchdowns and was pretty much lining up Ohio State's defense all game. CJ Stroud was very underwhelming as he completed 15 of 25 passes for less than 200 yards with a touchdown and an interception. The Buckeyes are another team that has just been very underwhelming to begin the season, and a team I'm concerned about moving forward. Speaking about being really concerned, number 11 is where I have Clemson. They beat Georgia Tech at home by only 6 points and were on upset watch until the last second of the game. Entering the fourth quarter, the Tigers led 7-3, and the Yellow Jackets had multiple chances to either tie or win the game. DJ Uiagalelei threw for only 125 yards with 0 touchdowns, and he's really concerning me to begin the season. He just doesn't look good, to put it kindly. He looks nothing like the quarterback we saw last season that stepped up for a few games for the Tigers. Clemson's offense has looked really bad to begin this season, and I mean really bad. Thank God for their defense, who still hasn't even allowed a touchdown yet through 3 games. I'm still counting on Clemson to figure things out, but they've been probably the most disappointing team to start the 2021 season. Making the jump all the way to number 12 is BYU. They've now beaten 3 teams from the Pac-12 South, including back-to-back wins against ranked teams. Now, I will say, Arizona State pretty much handed the game to the Cougars last night, as they had 4 turnovers and a million false start penalties. But BYU was still impressive, and they escaped with the victory. Jaron Hall had 250 yards of total offense and 2 touchdowns, while Tyler Algier had one of the craziest plays I've ever seen. Going back to last season, BYU has won 14 of 15 games. They've been one of the best teams in college football since the start of last season. I know that they lost Zach Wilson this offseason, but I think the Cougars are just as good, if not better, than they were a year ago. Number 13 is Notre Dame, who finally won a game that wasn't by a few points. Still though, it was a battle for them against Purdue. With 6 minutes left in the fourth quarter, the Irish had only a 7-point lead, but a 50-yard touchdown run helped give them a comfortable 2-touchdown edge. Aside from a big run from Kyron Williams, it was a quiet day for the offense. Jack Cohn completed only 50% of his passes, and if you take out that big run from Williams, he rushed for only 40 yards on 11 carries. I will give credit to Notre Dame's defense as they stepped up and made some big plays and some big interceptions late in the game when they needed to. Kyle Hamilton has proven that he's probably the best defensive player in the entire country, and he's quietly making himself a Heisman campaign. The Irish are 3-0 on the season so far, but man, it sure is an ugly 3-0. Number 14 is where Ole Miss comes in, who is without a doubt the best offense in all of college football. Seriously, I don't know how you're going to stop this team. They had 61 points with 8 minutes remaining in the third quarter. At that point, they just took it easy the rest of the way and didn't score. The Rebels had 41 first downs and over 700 yards of total offense. Again, that was just mainly through 3 quarters. Matt Corral was amazing yet again, as he threw for over 300 yards with 3 passing touchdowns while rushing for 70 yards and 4 touchdowns. He's the first quarterback since Colin Klein at Kansas State to throw for 3 touchdowns and rush for 4 touchdowns in a game. Ole Miss is next week off before going to Alabama in 2 weeks, and man, is that going to be a fun game. With how high powered this Ole Miss offense is, I think they have a legitimate shot to potentially upset Alabama. Coming up next at number 15, we have Iowa State, who had a nice bounce back 45-point victory on the road at UNLV. Brock Purdy had his best game of the season as he completed 21-24 passes for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. Breece Hall rushed for 100 yards and had 2 touchdowns on the ground as well. I'm not going to get too excited here considering this is UNLV we're talking about, but it was still nice to see the Cyclones take care of business without making things interesting. Number 16, we have Arkansas, who also took care of business as they beat Georgia Southern by 35 points. KJ Jefferson threw for nearly 400 yards with 3 touchdowns, and this Razorbacks rushing attack combined for nearly 300 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground. The defense also had themselves quite the day, as they allowed only 81 passing yards and 11 first downs. Arkansas continues to be a pleasant surprise, as both their offense and defense look legit. Next week they host Texas A&M, which will be a very telling game for this Razorbacks team. And you know what? I think they're going to be able to hang around with them. Number 17 is where I have the Michigan State Spartans jumping to. They've been fantastic this season, and they're now 3-0. They went on the road and knocked off number 24 Miami by 3 touchdowns. Kenneth Walker had himself another fantastic game as he rushed for 170 yards. Peyton Thorne threw for 260 yards and had 4 passing touchdowns as he continues to be one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten. The Spartans defense held De'Ara King in check as he threw 2 interceptions and had 21 incomplete passes. The run game for the Hurricanes was a non-factor as they rushed for only 52 yards on 24 carries. I myself had no expectations for this Michigan State team in 2021, but they've knocked off a top 25 team on the road and a team that was in the Big Ten title game last year. It's time to put some respect on this Spartans team. Jumping into the top 25 as well, at number 18, we have Fresno State. I'm sure most of you guys missed the game last night, but what Jake Haener did was simply incredible. He put the Bulldogs on his back and, despite an injury, led an insane comeback. The Bulldogs beat UCLA at the Rose Bowl 40-37, and they were essentially in control of the game all night. Haener threw for over 450 yards and had 2 passing touchdowns, including the game winner. Ronnie Rivers added 150 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground as well. After UCLA defeated LSU last week, the Bulldogs went into Pasadena and knocked off a top 15 team. Fresno State is now 3-1 on the season, with their lone loss coming to Oregon, who they were tied with only a few minutes left in the game. Number 19 is North Carolina, who had a pretty convincing 20-point victory over Virginia. Entering the game, I thought there was a chance that the Cavaliers could potentially make this one interesting. Well, at halftime, they had a 4-point lead, but North Carolina took control in the second half and outscored them by 24 points. Sam Howell had yet another incredible game as he threw for over 300 yards with 5 passing touchdowns, while also adding over 100 yards on the ground. Ty Chandler had 200 rushing yards while averaging 10 yards a carry with 2 rushing touchdowns. Ever since their opening week loss to Virginia Tech, North Carolina has bounced back nicely. Up next at number 20 are the Chanticleers. They had a very close win on the road at Buffalo as they won by only 3 points. Grayson McCall threw for 230 yards with 3 touchdowns on only 13 completions. Shamari Jones averaged more than 9 yards a carry and had over 150 yards with a touchdown on the ground. Buffalo has been a really good team in the MAC over the last few years, so I'm not shocked that they were able to make it a close game. Still, Coastal Carolina was able to walk out of there with a victory and remain undefeated. Coming in at number 22 is Michigan, who just continues to look solid to begin the season. They put up 63 points against Northern Illinois, all of which came in the first 3 quarters. Blake Corum was excellent yet again, as he rushed for 125 yards with 3 touchdowns. Donovan Edwards rushed for 90 yards with 2 scores, and Hassan Haskins added 60 yards with 2 touchdowns as well. It's tough to get too excited about this Michigan team based on who they've played so far, but hey, they're 3-0 and looking like a potential sleeper in the Big Ten. Sliding down to number 23 is UCLA, who lost to Fresno State. For being outplayed most of the game, the Bruins still had a solid shot to win this game. They had the go-ahead touchdown with less than a minute remaining, and it looked like they'd escape with the victory. Dorian Thompson-Robinson was essentially all of the Bruins' offense on the night. He threw for 300 yards with 3 touchdowns and led the team in rushing with 70 yards. Britton Brown and Zach Charbonnet were non-existent as they combined for only 42 yards on 15 carries. I still think UCLA is a solid team, as Fresno State is a tough opponent, but man, after one of the biggest wins in the program over the last few decades, how do you follow that up with a loss at home to a Group of 5 school? Sliding down to number 24 is Virginia Tech, who had a last-second loss on the road at West Virginia. Trailing by 6 with only 2 minutes left, the Hokies had first and goal on the 3-yard line, but couldn't get the ball in the end zone. They ended up turning it over and losing the game after failing to get 3 yards on 4 tries. It wasn't a pretty game from the Hokies, but they still had a chance to win late in the game. Plus, it was in a hostile environment against a very good West Virginia team. Wrapping up my top 25 is Maryland, who was another undefeated team in the Big Ten. They had a thrilling game-winning field goal against Illinois on Friday night. It wasn't the prettiest victory, but they're still undefeated to begin the season. Talia Tagovailoa threw for 350 yards with a touchdown and has been great for the Terps so far this year. He's thrown for 1,000 yards and has 7 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. Maryland's defense has also been very impressive, as they're allowing only 13 points a game. They have 2 tough games to begin October with Iowa and Ohio State. Those will be some fun games to see how the Terps can hang with the top dogs in the conference. Well, there's my own personal top 25 after the 3rd week of the college football season. Drop a comment down below and let me know your thoughts on these rankings. Was there a team that I had too high or too low? Let me hear it in the comments down below. If you haven't done so yet, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications if you're new to the channel. I'm posting college football videos all season long, so if you're a college football fan, then this is definitely the place for you. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video.